thank you for staying through the town hall final session of the day. I was told that we're sticking with our theme of Yogi Berra quotes for the we did the fork one, we did something, but no one's done the future ain't what it used to be. And Yogi Berra, for those of you that know, grew up near here, and so it seems like a good year to be doing his quotes. For those of you who weren't in yesterday's opening session, I'm Ted Abernathy and serve as the Economic Development Policy Advisor for the Southern Governors Association. What we're going to do at lunch here is what's known as a town hall meeting. And for about the last 15 years, first the Southern Growth Policy Board and then Southern Governors Association has done a program called Listening to the South that's part of the Kettering Foundation's agenda. Kettering is a foundation dedicated to citizen democracy out of Ohio. Mr. Kettering invented the self-start car, which he was smart enough to sell to all three of the big three automakers and made $1 gazillion and endowed an organization that spends their time trying to understand how citizens can be more involved in the decisions in their communities. And so we've been lucky enough over the years to talk about to citizens about a lot of very hard subjects. Energy policy and community work. And this year we're doing a project at Southern Governors talking about economic vitality in communities and what communities can and should do. What are their choices? And so we're going to spend about the next 45 minutes talking about economic vitality, but I'd like to ask for a vote first, and I do this with a lot of groups. I want you to tell me how the economy's doing. And first I'm going to ask you about the national economy, second about your state's economy, and then last about your hometown's economy, wherever you're living currently. And I want you to give it an A, B, C, D, or F. So for the national economy, for the U.S. economy, how many people think our economy is currently an A, B, C, D, F? Your state's economy, A, B, C, D, F. And your hometown, where you live, economy, A's, B's, C's, D's, or F's. Now, anybody notice what happened in the room? The federal economy is worse, your state economy is a little bit better, and your local economy is better than that, right? So I want to ask you a question, and we've got microphones, so I need you, we're taping this. I want someone to tell me what it was that they thought about when I said, how's the economy? What did you measure? Because if I looked at stock markets, which have been for the last year near record highs, or corporate profits that have been near record highs, or U.S. exports that have been near record highs, we're all giving the U.S. economy a C. And yet there's a lot of numbers. Last year was the biggest job growth year since the 1990s. And you are very much like every other group, by the way. You're not a bunch of pessimists, so don't think you are. But who can tell me what they thought of when they gave their grade they gave? All right.
Job growth, unemployment rate, wage levels, business startups, technology companies, and international trade.
Mike's comprehensive, right? Who else thought? We'll get you, Mike, coming your way.
State tax revenues and local tax revenues.
Okay. Work for a state, do you? Okay. What else do people think of?
So similar to the first speaker, I thought unemployment, but I also thought days on the market of homes in my state, and also spending all my time in the airport. The airports are full, so I view that as a...
You get a higher grade for that. Yeah, okay. What else? Who else? Something hadn't been mentioned. Anybody? Yeah.
Well, not just the growth, but where we are relative to where we were before the Great Recession. Okay. So, great growth rate now, but we're still, I feel climbing back out.
Just quickly, it took 78 months to get out. Almost 9 million jobs, took 78 months to get out. We're about 4 million above that now. One of the things that is really different is that just under half of our metros haven't made it back. I mean, the growth has been very disproportionate, and some of you would say some of the wealth has concentrated, or people without degrees haven't done as well. So there's an inequity that comes there. There's also sort of a national woe is me about some of this, right? So when we start talking about the term economic vitality, community-based economic vitality, then the first really hard question is, what in the world does that mean? What does economic vitality mean for your community? Now, is there anybody here who doesn't think we should have economic vitality in communities? Make sure we get off to. All right, so if you're trying to have economic vitality in your community, and for this, I want you to think about your place. What does that mean to you? What does that term mean? Anybody? That's great.
We're in a rural community, and that would mean market options, increased options in retail and housing and things of that nature are reflected in the community.
How big's the community?
Oh, gosh, Rolla, that's terrible. About 24,000. Mm-hmm.
So 24,000 small. I grew up in a community of 2, and suburban out in the farm outside that, so not really in there, but we claimed it. What does community vitality mean? Somebody else? By the way, I will pick on you, just letting you know that. Just true.
Investment in infrastructure.
Okay, so
building for the future.
So if you're seeing vitality in a community, there's something on the ground happening for the future.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll come right back up here. You do that one, I'll do this one. No, you're next.
I was thinking from specifically to my hometown, new businesses either moving to town or existing businesses expanding.
Seeing that.
So we have a dashboard like somebody was talking about earlier today, and we look at employment growth. We look at population growth, GDP growth, per capita income growth, and a new metric that we're adding, economic mobility.
Everybody follow those? The ability to move between the quintiles, the quartiles of economic success. That's a vitality, too. That's a specific vitality thing. I mean, what else? Yeah.
It's a matter of what's growing, and by my understanding, over the 2003 to 2013 period, healthcare was the only industry that really took off, and you had a net growth of 2.7% across all the other sectors in that 10-year period. And that, to me, particularly insofar as it's not producing better health, is not a sustainable area for growth. So a lot of growth in jobs, a lot of growth in infrastructure, but not a place that I would want to see as my 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah, over that sort of shift in what happened. I mean, population. As population continued to grow, jobs grew in health, some in education, some in business professional services, but losses in other places, especially traditional, lost manufacturing jobs, a lot of them. We've had a lot of that conversation here. We lost construction jobs. We're still not anywhere near back to our construction levels. A lot of blue-collar jobs, a lot of jobs for men. So a lot of communities have seen that fallout come back. What else? When you think, all of us do this. We drive through a community, or we stop in a community and we say, well, that community has vitality or vibrancy or whatever word we use. Or, I'm sorry to use this word, or that's a sad community. That community looks like, So what makes the difference? When you look at the place, what is it that you see vitality?
I think your example is good there. I was going to say churn, new job opportunities, the ability to move on, not be stuck in the same job or not be stuck in an unemployment situation. You're driving through a community, it's the now open and coming soon signs, right? Yep. And as soon as that's gone, if a place does close, it's somebody hanging up the next coming soon sign and seeing that continual turnover.
I did some listening sessions for the Delta Regional Authority this year, and I told Chris this story. About the second one we were in, someone came up with a term that I'd never heard before, and I sort of discounted it. And then I heard it again and again across the Delta, which was indicators of a death spiral. And I started asking, well, what does that mean? And it was boarded up downtown. It was nothing new, no signs up. There was no hiring at the local anywhere. And they were showing that that was there. So that was part of it.
And I think building on what you just said, Ted, like when I go to a new town for work and you leave your hotel and you look around, you see what's going on. I mean, are there people out? Are there people doing things? Or is it, at 5 o'clock, does everyone go home and it's a ghost town?
Visual vibrancy, right? You can see it in a community. How much of it's attitude? I mean, some of it's physical. We started talking about buildings and roads and other things. How much of vibrancy or vitality is attitude in a community? What do you think? Does it matter? Pride, spirit. What about leadership? Does that matter? The woe is me part versus the we can part. Yeah. So what we handed out to you was a bunch of facts, some of which are depressing as all get out, and some of which sort of set a stage. When we do Kettering work, the question is deliberative. I mean, so we all want vibrant communities. We all know, and the room seems to agree generally what that means, a good one or a bad one or whatever. But then about half of you in this room spend almost every day of your life trying to make places better. Right? I mean, that's your full-time job, is trying to help places, right? You're trying to make your communities better. You're trying to make your hometowns, your states, your whatever. But then the problem becomes, well, why don't we just make them all better? Look at all these smart people here. We've got resources. What is it that's preventing us from having community vitality? Why is not every community in the American South vibrant these days? What holds us back? Leadership? Yep. You're going to go do that. I'm going to let you talk about that.
I think poverty, because it takes from the system and it doesn't contribute financially to the system. If we can eliminate poverty, that would be more financial incentives to grow further.
How do we do that?
How do we do that? You get people that think that no, seriously, it's how do we do anything in life? What's important to me? If eradicating poverty is important to me, we'll get poverty eradicated. So we need leaders that see that and want to do that.
How do we get those leaders?
Well, it's capacity. What we saw in our listening sessions that you facilitated is that the gap of local capacity for the community, capacity for the individual, and capacity for the organizations, that technical understanding and wherewithal how to get stuff done, plus the leadership.
What else causes us not to be able?
I think your point about the seismic shift in the next decade or two, I think that's already occurring. And there are a lot of people, particularly in rural communities, that's completely obsolete skill sets and still living in what was good enough for my dad era. So
yeah, one of the places we're working has a slogan, good enough is good enough. I keep blinking but it is what it is. What else prevents vitality? Because honestly, if it was just about getting everybody to prioritize it and finding some good leadership, you pointed out some of this is structural. It's gotten harder, right? Change is tough. I think I started with that yesterday.
When there's competition, and when there's competition, there are winners and losers, and not everybody's going to win.
You want to expound on that? Because that's
really
the key to our whole discussion.
Well, no, it's just, it's not, I don't want to say it's a static system, but where we are right now, I don't think things are going to be growing fast enough for every community, even if they may make all the right decisions, to grow at the same pace that the leaders are.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So we actually asked groups this question. We asked you, do you believe the world's changing? And everybody would say yes. And we asked, do you see greater competition than you've ever seen in the past? And most of you would say yes. And then we say, well, if it's competition and it's greater, are there going to be winners and losers? And I always push people because that's a really tough question. If they're going to be winners and losers, how many of you think there are winners and losers? Okay. So then the question becomes quickly, well, can communities do something to improve their chances of winning? And if the answer to that is yes, then all we have to do is figure out what that is, right? That's how you change community vitality. That's tough. Mike?
I think there's a funny thing about winners and losers. The winners certainly subscribe to the notion that there will be losers until they're losers. then it becomes a different perspective. Like, think of this audience right here. There's nobody in this room here that's unemployed. There's nobody in here that's lived in poverty, so the conversation is going to be different. So we do need a new set of rules for how we create well-being for a greater number of people.
So when you look at the sheets you have in front of you, 3 of the options that Kettering, mostly Linda here, has developed is that there are also choices that we make because we don't have unlimited resources and we don't have either people or money, that we sort of have to make choices. And in our profession, we talk all the time that strategic is about choice. It's not about a list. We can all make a list. You know, what could a community do to be better? Well, here's a list of 7,000 things. Now I got enough money to fund 6 of them. What am I going to choose to do? And so there are different pathways. The first sort of pathway we talked about on here is really focusing on making communities attractive to employers. That it's mostly about jobs. You know, how do we invest and make communities more attractive? It's about building up the place, making those communities better. But there are trade-offs there. You know, if you build physical infrastructure, then, you know, it's costly. It means you're not investing in something else. If you train, you know, your individuals locally, you build the best technical school possible, there's no guarantee they stay. I mean, so if a community's trying to figure this out, how much of what they do should be built around making their community the most attractive it can be for the business investment? Is that a key? Coming up behind you.
I think it is a key, but I think a piece of that is communities recognizing what they want to attract and sort of the recognition that not every place can attract every industry. You know, everyone wants to be the next Silicon Valley, but the reality is not every place is going to be the next Silicon Valley. So knowing which good and stable employers and which industries or which type of businesses you want to attract needs to inform the policies that go into trying to make that push.
So there's an understanding of local assets before you even start.
Know who you are and what you're trying to be.
I mean, is that the key to community vitality, though? Is it being the best you can be, the most attractive place you can be for industries to move there, grow there, start there? What's the key?
I don't know that it's necessarily job growth, because really attracting retirees is as valid an economic development strategy as any, and you don't have the infrastructure investment to go along with that. And honestly, of these 3 options, in terms of leveling the playing field, I don't think it has anything to do with wages as much as it has to do with providing the infrastructure. I think that's the big difference, is you don't see high-speed internet in the rural communities as you do in the urban areas. Worked a number of jobs or projects in rural communities, and the thing that killed it every time was lack of high-speed internet access. So.
We talked a little bit about broadband yesterday morning, and it's been a high thing in most of the rural stuff we've done. It's also been not just access, but this year we heard more and more that it's affordability. That because of the nature of that dispersed user base, that the affordability has gotten to a point where it's not possible in rural areas. So we're not doing these sort of one versus the other, but if you look at number 2, it's workers in the community, but it's also self-reliance. It's this idea that we ought to, today we're building that sort of independent gig society, and it's not about, because the compact, if you will, between a company and their community, or a company and their worker, just isn't what it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, the company came in and they built the community center, and sometimes they built the housing, and they, whether you like it or not, sort of that mill village, they owned the community, right? And there was that compact between, all right, you you provide us the workers and do everything, and we'll take care of the rest. Or there was the worker compact. If I come work for you, you'll keep me for 35 years and give me a gold watch, and everything will be okay. And does anybody think those compacts still exist on a broad basis in the world? Yeah. Right back there.
I feel like there's a big shift for collective impact. We hear that a lot in Cincinnati, where I'm at. A lot of the organizations pulling together to say, we have this issue of poverty and it affects our entire community. And some of our biggest leaders have come together to say, how do we solve that? Because we know not one organization can do that. So I think there's a shift toward collective impact to help with these things. And I think we even see it in the government with public-private partnerships. Everyone needs to kind of step up to the plate to help out.
This may come to a shock to some people, but the purpose of businesses is not to hire people. It's to make a profit. And so the role of technology and robotics and all that is going to reduce a lot of work that was, prior, handled by people making a good income. Last year we had Thomas Friedman speak at our annual conference, and he said something I'll never forget. Average is over. 20 years ago, you could have average skills and make an average salary. You can't do that now, and you especially can't do that in the future. You've got to find your niche, your special, to make yourself distinguish from, workers in Mexico making $2 an hour. That's just the way it is.
Who just got depressed again? Mike, you missed yesterday morning we talked a little bit about technological unemployment, and that something close to 50% of all jobs are susceptible over the next 20 years to computerization and automation, and a lot of them at the lower end, so that we were going to see those impacts.
I think what you said earlier about the compact is a very wise thing, that's the way it was. And you're right. And technology, the purpose of technology is to get rid of people. But then it leads to the question is, what is the game that we're in? And the game we're in is not just about companies to make money. It's about companies who participate in this society to create a greater good for all. That was the earlier compact. I grew up in a blue-collar district. People had jobs. They took care of their families. When you have this total computerization occurring, that compact is broken. And right now we have 62% of the adults working, the rest not working. When you get that computerization, it's going to be a very different kind of country. And that's what we should be having the conversation about. It's the agreement with industry, because historically it's been mutually beneficial. It's freed people up to go in the middle class, and manufacturing in particular. But we have different kinds of challenges, and I don't hear many creative solutions to those challenges yet.
You talked about collective impact, and that's a big pot. It's a real area now, and it's running sort of counter to the independent movement in business and society, and that everybody's out there, they're on their own. So who's making up the collective? If we're solving problems collectively, and it's not really, I see that it's not as structured as it used to be. It's not the same people, not the same players it used to be. It's different. Who makes those up now?
It's been kind of fascinating to watch on some of the boards that I sit on to see how it works, because you can't just declare yourself as, I'm the person who's going to oversee this collective impact. So it has to be a more natural trend toward that. And I'm a part of an organization we know we're the person who should be leading the piece of the collective impact, but we can't declare it. And so it's this back and forth that weaves in and out, I feel like, until finally the community decides, yes, that this is who should be leading it. But usually it's one leader with many organizations that they bring together that have a common cause.
Okay. The third thing here was trying to level the field, that what we've just described is an unfair playing field. People are being left behind, something or another is wrong, and we need to fix that. And there's been calls for that different ways over the last few years, that public policy there. When I go out and talk to groups, I don't hear a widespread majority saying that's what we ought to be doing. But I hear people say, well, that's not fair. American sort of core tenet is fairness of what's going on. Is what's going on fair? Should we do something about it? What do you think? Subjective, fairness is a subjective term, right? Your fairness and my fairness are different. All right, it's not even, right? We can agree on that. So we, in southern states all over, one of the real conundrums we have today is that job growth and investment is concentrating in our urban areas. That's true, I think, of every state around. The only state in the South that didn't urbanize more over the last 30 years is Alabama. They got just slightly less urban. But everybody else, some of them as much as 20%. And when you look at places that are represented in this room, a lot of the investment's going there, and legislators don't want that, right? They want to spread the wealth. We call it shredding the peanut butter at our house. They want to spread it. Well, how do you have more communities have that vibrancy? What do you do? Because that's what legislators struggle with, right? How do we make sure Cape Girardeau does as well as Kansas City? How do we make sure that Selma does as well as Mobile? I mean,
I'll mention one example, but we'll see how it pans out. Prior to coming here, I spent the last couple of days in Somerset, Kentucky, South Central. Happens to be the hometown of Congressman Harold Hal Rogers, 35-year member, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. So one strategy is elect somebody and keep sending them back. Obviously, that's not fair, but there it is. But what's going on in Kentucky is very interesting for several reasons. It is all around broadband. It's all around rural access. It's all around the now obsolescence of the coal workforce. And it is all about bipartisan and nonpartisan cooperation. The governor and the congressman of opposite parties, I've said this a few times lately, Ted, what's a statesman but an old politician? But these two experienced leaders are joined at the hip on broadband across Kentucky, but as Mr. Rogers will always say, starting in eastern Kentucky. What the state and the partnership of the chairman of Approps have been able to do is to put about, let me see if I've got this right, about 45 million in combined state and federal resources behind what is ultimately a north of $300 million project. And they're going to do it through bonding in partnership with Macquarie Capital from Australia, which is bringing about 271 to the table. And this will be for not the Louisville, although Jefferson County will probably see some benefit, but this is about the Silicon Holler, as the chairman calls it.
Okay, that's a good. So I'd like to say you're welcome for sending my federal tax dollars to Eastern Kentucky, right? Because I've now just invested in making Eastern Kentucky more vibrant. I didn't get a vote on it, but that's what happened, right? My tax dollar went there. That's redistribution of wealth, right? Isn't that what that is? Is that what we're doing? Should we be doing that? When you think about lots of places, incentives higher for poor areas, different, pushing infrastructure, is that what we should be doing as a society, is trying to spread out stuff? The marketplace clearly isn't doing that, right? Market's clearly doing an urbanization focus. So how many of you think, given a choice, you're now all voting, so I want to use as little resources as possible and let the market determine where it is that growth's going to be, or I want to use my resources to redistribute it so that it will be more evenly distributed across the states? How many of you want to redistribute it as evenly as you can across the states? How many of you want to let the market determine it and not use your money to redistribute? And how many of you are like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to vote, right?
Third category is you make your market as best you can to compete across the board, though.
That's option one, right?
Do you mind?
Sure. No, please.
I think I got an MPA instead of an MBA because I think government has a role in maybe evening the playing field, maybe not redistributing wealth, but evening, you know what I mean, giving the resources or the way to do things evenly, and the market has an obligation to compete, and I think government evens.
I need to, as a state, run the 2-lane highway to the area that doesn't have it so they can compete better. I need to subsidize the broadband going out because it doesn't. I need to do that. I need to, right? This is the hard part, right? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds in your head. I'm going to tell you it's coming. I'm going to ask you what you'd do. I'm going to give you all $500 million. You get $500 million in your state, you get to fix some of this. You get to make more places economically vibrant. What do you do with that?
Invest more in education.
Invest more in education. Which part?
Across the board. I think that's the best. All the way.
Okay. Mike just spent his $500 million on education. Where are you spending your money?
Actually, I was going to say education as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good. Brett, where are you spending yours?
Specifically on skills and also last mile money so that you can get your education online.
All right. Where are you spending your money?
I probably would be more on the workforce development side of the education and broadband.
Electronics and people, right? You're next.
So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it would be pre-K daycare. I mean, allowing people to free themselves of those costs so they can work or go to school.
How many people here love pre-K? I got my hand up. I've run a couple of United Ways in my life, not the staff person, the board person had to raise all the money. So I've done a couple of that in my life. I always tell people if I had an extra $100 million, I'm putting it in pre-K because I can make the most difference there.
Actually, sitting beside Sean, he was talking about the Eisenhower interstate system, about how that helped transform our country.
Yep.
And so I think about broadband in much the same way on the connectivity, just in a different era. So I don't think there's anything wrong with us investing in infrastructure because we're only held back by our lack of imagination. And if we don't have an ability to connect with people, then that becomes a limiting factor.
As I walk over to that table, anybody worried that we don't actually have any money? We're just writing checks. Anybody worried? I don't know. Where would you spend your $500 million?
I'd put 2/3 of it to establish universal pre-K and the other third to go to college scholarships.
There you go. Why is pre-K so hard if we all want to do it? Where do you put your $500 million?
Everybody's kind of taking my answers here. I think any investment in education, I think K through 12, I mean pre-K is important, but I think that K through 12, particularly in communities that are underserved, that have educational challenges, unaccredited districts, those kinds of areas, kind of targeted investments there, along with pre-K.
Okay, so this is just I can do anything I want, right? So I think education's a great long-term plan, and I think probably more realistic. But ultimately, when you think of vibrant communities, you think of people. The creative class, the people that are out there starting businesses and being creative. I would just buy those people. I would just pay them to come. Pay them to come.
Talent attraction's a big deal in America now. Lots of communities doing it. You got your $500 million.
Well, obviously education, everyone's touched on that, but infrastructure seems like a big deal, especially in rural communities, and investing in that and getting them up to the 21st century.
Cool. $500 million?
So I would do a third on higher education investment, a third on early childhood learning, which has incredible ROI, and a third on fixing the interstates.
Okay.
I would invest in education, and I would do it across the whole continuum.
Education, as many people have already mentioned. Also, what's not been mentioned, seed and venture capital for growth technology companies, where we're going to find a lot of new types of companies grow.
Who hasn't told me? Where'd you spend yours? You want to build a better port? No, I'm talking.
Yeah, I'd build a better port. I'd spend the money on early childhood education because I firmly believe that unless we invest in early childhood education, the future will be lost. I see early childhood education as a long-term economic development investment.
I agree with the education piece. I think what's missing sometimes from the conversation is the many single female headed households raising the children, sending them to school that don't have the supports long term, that even if they have the education, they don't have what they need to continue along that path. So I would invest some in being mentors, because that's proven to help those children in need.
So nobody gave it back to the people, right? Nobody gave their 500 million back to everybody. Anybody think about that? Having scarred body from going to legislators in the South over the last 2 years, I don't have to frame the question. That'll come up. Where would you spend your money?
I think I'd set it all aside to match private investments, to attract capital, attract talent, attract investment into education. I think we've seen in Missouri, Mike, others have referenced, we've seen success at that. And I think you have to attract a private investment, because our 500 million is going to run out like that, and somebody else has got to spend their money on it.
Can I just invest in getting a car manufacturer? Does that work? I'm just saying, that's probably about the right ante, isn't it? 500 million? The point of these kind of discussions is that no matter what money I give you, if you spend it on one thing, you can't spend it on the other, right? And unfortunately, the real question tends to be, you get to take 500 million from something else. I don't get to make it up. So if I told all of you that instead of getting 500 million, you had to tell me where you would take it from and put it, that's where communities, especially at the local level, are. They're balancing a budget. They have, in small rural communities, 500 million is a funny number. I mean, we're talking about what do you do with the 50,000 that you might have? And do you give it to your schools so that you can get a couple extra, teachers' aides in kindergarten? Or do you do a downtown revitalization project? Or you give it to your economic development people so they can try to find you better jobs? Those are the real sort of questions that people struggle with every day. And we tend not to put the choices up against each other. We tend to have a discussion about, I want all of this, right? Here are the 42 things we can do to make our communities better. And we could, clearly, but anybody adopted a community yet and just said, whatever you need? I'm waiting for that. I mean, I think there's a couple corporations in America who've done a little bit of that, I think, that they've made their hometowns awful nice with that kind of stuff. So after this discussion, what do you do to have the best chance of improving economic vitality in a community? What do you think? I mean, it sounded a lot like people, you invest in the people, right? What happens when they are in rural areas and you invest in all those people and they just leave? And they go to the urban area?
Mentioned before, it's one thing about having the graduates, whether at high school or college, you got to keep them. You got to have a place to keep them that's attractive to the young talent.
Anybody know young 22-year-old college grads who want to live in small town America in large numbers? For me, the rural issue is one of the biggest conundrums in public policy we have. Everybody wants that answer, and it's not easy because you got to make places more attractive, right?
Yep. Say it. We keep hearing that the millennials are upsetting the apple cart, and they're deciding where they want to live, and then they're figuring out the workplace. I don't know how the data holds up on that, but I'm wondering, are we seeing a trend of rural locations with the right assets becoming more attractive to this next workforce coming along, independent of where they might find a job?
The data I've seen is that the bigger the place, the faster the growth. It makes no difference on anything else. It's size so far. And it's not all places, by the way. We got big cities that are shrinking and mid-sized cities that are growing pretty fast, but micropolitans are growing slower than mid-size, and mid-size are growing slower than large, and the big ones are growing larger than that as a metropolitan area. So, and the higher education level you take into account, the more the numbers skew. So it's urbanization in a big way. Let her go and then you. You're next. You
To that point too, I wonder about the role of technology because I live in the District of Columbia, I live in DC, and I have a number of friends who are in their 30s who have decided to move back home to where they grew up, but they're keeping their same jobs and they're telecommuting, and their companies are allowing them to, maintain their exact position and just work off-site. So I think technology is going to play an interesting role in determining that.
It can.
I think she just shored up my point too. I think what's driving location is the technology-based amenities that are available, in Kansas City as opposed to, Albany, Missouri. So
Coming up behind you.
I mean, and we see that same factor in a number of our locations, places outside the U.S., particularly in Asia and Singapore, where it's very crowded. There's a lot of density. Everyone in our offices there is basically told, work from home 1 day a week or more. The company gives them a stipend to pay for their home internet, buy office furniture to make it a productive environment. But it's a conscious decision to be made both for, I think, the employees who like, the freedom to do things in different places, but also for the company to, whether it's, saving money on real estate or being able to, not have to rent 2 more floors to house more people if we're expanding.
So the education and skills of the people and the quality and technological competencies of the place. That's what I heard. That helps. With a little arch thrown in and some infrastructure thrown in, a little bit of a, It's funny, but we do want it all, right? When you think about vitality and you've traveled around the world, I'm not going to ask everybody this, but just think about the places you thought were economically just wonderful. They weren't all big cities, right? Some of you have been lucky enough to go through some little village in Switzerland and go, God, this is great, isn't it? Or you've been to Floyd, Virginia and said, wow, this is a cool place to be in Floyd, Virginia, right? There ain't much in Floyd, Virginia, but it's pretty cool, right? If you've never been to Floyd, go listen to the music. It's great stuff. So it doesn't have to be big to be vibrant, but it has to have some quality about it to be vibrant. And that takes leadership and it takes a dedication to that. Any final thoughts from anyone? Because I promised I'd have you out on time.
Just one note, for a lot of the economic developers, if you don't read Janet Ady's blogs, please do. She had an interesting blog yesterday about headquarters relocations and talked about the trend towards larger areas and talked access to talent being very important, proximity to their own assets, and international airports. So again, just very interesting blog for folks who are interested.
Yeah, there's data on what drives decisions, and there's some people out there who do that. Let me tell you what happens with your input, because I appreciate it. I appreciate this conversation. We're doing dozens, if not hundreds of these forums all across the South. And what will come out the back end will be a publication for communities about how people feel about community vitality, what works, what doesn't work. Kettering does this with, they do national issues forums and other books on this. And it's all citizen-driven. It's all, what do y'all think? So that we can then share that with decision makers and policy makers across the country. And we do it from the South, but there are people doing it all over the country on the same type of discussion. So there'll be something out the end, and we'll make sure that SGA posts final reports and all that so you can see them all. Do you want to close? Thank you all for this.
Thank you, Ted, and give yourselves a round of applause for being part of this and sticking it out to the end, too. I appreciate that. I've heard from a number of folks here today and yesterday that there are a lot of big thinkers that have come together in this room over the last 24 hours, and our whole goal is really about building a stronger community with more resources to support our governors and their policy folks as they struggle with big questions. So please stay engaged. Check us out at www.southern.org. We're going to continue to release more data on the things that we've talked about during this conference, and we're going to continue to unpack some of those things and try to get further into them. So I look forward to your input. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to the entire team for Governor Nixon. We really appreciate your support and engagement. And thank you for just being here with us today. So safe travels home. Thank you. Oh, one last thing I neglected to mention. My staff, Charlotte Cole, Ryan Hoyle, Dave Cook, Ted Abernathy, Linda Hoke, they made this possible. So thank them too.